let's understand and appreciate what's going on here, what happened to people of color in the Mexican territories that eventually become states in the United States federal system. So what we're going to do here in this segment is try to understand what happened to people of color and take it state by state. So let's start with California and we'll move eastward. Now, in 1849, the California Constitution gave whites full citizenship, and it emphasized whites. Native peoples, mestizos, African descent peoples held no political rights in the state constitution. There was a state Supreme Court in a case that was called Suñol versus Hepburn, that ruled that Christian Indians were not given any constitutional rights. In fact, blood quantum was used to determine whiteness. Originally, it was half or more Indian blood would determine your non-whiteness, but that's going to be changed to a quarter. And then for Africans, if you were 1/8 or more African, you were non-white, you were mulatto. Curiously enough, in 1870, a court case called Pueblo versus Pablo de la Guerra, an interesting twist occurred in racial classification systems, in the racial classification of Mexicans. In 1869, Pablo de la Guerra, a California landholder who had signed the California Constitution, ran for district judge. And his opponent challenged his right to office on the grounds that Congress had failed formally to grant citizenship to de la Guerra or other Californios. Now, the California Supreme Court upheld de la Guerra's right to run for public office, arguing that when California was admitted as a state, former Mexican nationals had in fact become citizens. But yet this decision did not help Mexicans in the state. You had to prove your whiteness. Now, if you had any African blood in you, you are African, you are black. And as black people, you faced marriage restrictions. You could not marry into the white race. You could not testify against whites in court, and you were limited in your occupations. Meanwhile, non-conquered native peoples faced federal removal policy. Genocide occurred between 1850 to 1855. To white Americans, the period became known as Indian hunting season. You could literally go out and hunt Indians. It is estimated that the native population went from 310,000 to 50,000 in this era. That's California. Let's go and appreciate New Mexico. Now, the territory of New Mexico was created on September 9th, 1850, and it consisted of present-day New Mexico and Arizona and parts of present-day southern Colorado, southern Utah, and southern Nevada. That was New Mexico. In 1863, New Mexico is going to be divided in half, and the western portion will become Arizona territory. Now, New Mexico and Arizona remained territories until 1912. And the reason why they did not become states was because the majority of the inhabitants were Mexican or native. Both people in the United States' view were inassimilable and hence unqualified for citizenship. But at the outset, Mexicans formed a majority in the territorial assembly in New Mexico, with some Hispanic landholders holding positions of power. And one prominent member of the community was this particular man named Father Antonio Jose Martinez. And with the transformation of power to the United States, the Catholic Church in Mexico eventually had to relinquish ecclesiastical control to the American faith-based community headquartered in Boston. Father Martinez is going to have to deal with the racism that came west inside the Catholic Church. Yet he is noted for defending the citizenship rights of indigenous and Mexican people in the territory. In a most famous case of 1869, the United States versus Lucero, Pueblos are going to be given full citizenship status based on the Treaty of Guadalupe, Hidalgo. And this was because of Father Antonio Jose Martinez's advocacy. Yet the Supreme Court made a note that pueblos were not Mexican. Now, in a curious twist, the first Mexican governor of the territory, Miguel A. Ortero, in order to preserve the power of the rich Mexican group, the elite, the Hispanic elite, against the onslaught of Southern racism that was moving west, ensured that New Mexico would not become a slave state by abolishing slavery. And furthermore, people of African descent are not going to be allowed in New Mexico territory, and they could not reside in the area for more than 30 days, again, because of the fear that it would bring in slave interests. And so goes for New Mexico. Now let's move to Arizona. We're going to backtrack to Arizona because Arizona is going to be carved out of New Mexico. And Arizona was carved out by Southern slave interests who insisted on creating a white majority, simply because in New Mexico it was a Mexican majority. The majority of the population in Arizona, though, were native peoples, with Mexicans forming a significant group in the southeast and along the border. Now, because of the extreme aridity and the desert's heat, Arizona attracted few settlers. And with the Gadsden Purchase incorporating the Mexican South, the territorial legislature had to accept the terms of the Gadsden Treaty, which authorized Mexicans as citizens of the United States. Now, the legislature insisted that only white males could be citizens. So any Mexican who was not white is going to be included in the Native American population and subject to removal or enslavement. And so Arizona always questioned, well, which Mexicans qualified for citizenship? That's Arizona. Let's move to Texas. Now, in Texas, in 1836, the Texas Constitution allowed citizenship to all whites and Mexicans who were not black or native. So when the United States took over, all Mexicans in Texas are going to have to prove their residence prior to 1845 to be naturalized. If no proof of residence could be determined, then they were not allowed naturalization. There was curiously, in the state Supreme Court case of McCullen versus Hodge, Native peoples in Texas lost all land grants. They had to prove their Mexican citizenship or their missionized status in order to be considered part of U.S. society. Now, the major problem was, of course, that no records of their citizenship nor mission status was archived in the Texas General Land Office when Texas became independent. Now, of all Native peoples residing in the state, only two groups are going to be recognized but not given citizenship. And that is the Isleta Pueblo del Sur in El Paso, Texas, and the Alabama Coushatta in East Texas near Houston. Africans under Mexican rule had the opportunity to become free when Mexico abolished slavery in 1832. But the Alamo and the creation of Texas stopped the dream. And after the war, Africans who were free landowners lost title to property in Texas. And any person of African descent was not recognized and had the option of becoming a slave or being deported to Mexico. So in 1840, persons of African heritage could gain protection from deportation if they could prove that they had never been slaves during Mexican and Spanish rule. This was known as the Ashworth Law. Blacks had 10 days from the passage of the law to prove that they had never been slaves, and if not, they were sold into slavery or they were deported to Mexico. Africans are going to be expelled from New Mexico, and this was one of the reasons why Arizona Territory was carved out of New Mexico, was to provide a balance between free and slaveholding interests. Africans would have to wait for the Civil War to gain their freedom in the newly acquired territory known as the Southwest United States. So let's end this segment by appreciating what happened to Californios who were recognized as citizens but ended up losing their class status. We will become familiar with two people in this film clip, Mariano Vallejo and Apolinaria Lorenzana. Let's go to the film clip.
The Mexican-American War lasted nearly 2 years. With Mexico's surrender in February 1848, the United States doubled in size, adding to its territory a full half of what had once been Mexico.
The enormous wealth that came to the United States, the silver that came out of Nevada, Arizona became the center of copper in the United States. New Mexico supplied a huge portion of America's wool. All of this was Mexican territory seized by the United States as a result of winning the Mexican-American War.
80,000 Mexicans were given the choice to become American citizens under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo.
The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo provided certain rights and protections for the newly made American citizens of Mexican descent. That included protection of their land rights, for example. They were to be treated as citizens entitled to the right to vote.
Americans and Mexicans will now be one and the same people, the military governor of California, Richard Mason, declared. Subject to the same laws, enjoying the same rights and privileges. They should become a band of brothers. Mariano Vallejo had returned home to Sonoma after 2 months in prison, only to find squatters on his land, his cattle slaughtered, his horses stolen. Confident that his rights would be protected under American law, he vowed to burn his Mexican Army uniform as a gesture of allegiance to the United States.
As it worked out, those rights and privileges were continually tested.
In January 1848, a chance discovery at a water channel near Sacramento would challenge Vallejo's confidence in the future. As the gold rush forever transformed California.
California, my God, California, the discovery of gold, basically overwhelms the old Mexican families of Northern California. They're overwhelmed almost immediately.
The first to profit from the boom were those who lived near Sacramento, mostly Mexicans and Californios. A justice of the peace from Los Angeles, Antonio Coronel, rushed to the goldfields to try his luck.
Everyone began to work at daybreak. Soon, after a little digging, we came to the gold deposits, and everyone who was working was happy with the results.
As word spread around the world, young men from China to Chile and every corner of the American continent left everything behind and flocked to California. With the Americans came a new hierarchy based on race.
What we see being imported into California very powerfully is a sense of, well, the Anglos, this is their destiny. This is one of the expressions of the providential mission to conquer and civilize all America for the Anglo peoples. And they should be given first crack, first opportunity to get this gold. This is a moment in which the Spanish-speaking inhabitants of California find themselves being discriminated against.
Antonio Coronel noted how the weaker were dislodged from their diggings by the stronger.
One Sunday, notices appeared in several places that anyone who was not an American citizen must abandon the place within 24 hours. This was supported by a gathering of armed men, ready to make that warning effective.
Lynching was commonplace. You find many traveler accounts of individuals riding through the countryside and coming across an individual who was hanging from a tree.
As many as 300 Mexicans were lynched in California in the years of the gold rush.
Lynchings were meant to be public displays of the power of American society and of Anglos in American society. They were intended to send a message to Latinos about their place in American California.
Made into postcards and sold as souvenirs, lynchings were the most grotesque, but not the only demonstration of racial violence in the American Southwest.
Latinos are seen as greasers, as knife-wielding, dangerous, dirty, swarthy, threatening figures in gold rush society. On the other hand, there are stereotypes about Californios, about Vallejo and others, who are seen as baronial estate holders, feudal lords of the Middle Ages who've landed in this 19th century, but who are really products of another time.
San Francisco, the gateway to the goldfields, grew from a pueblo of 200 people to a city of 36,000 in the years of the gold rush. By the late 1850s, in the state of California, 13,000 Mexicans were outnumbered by 300,000 Anglos. And as the gold ran out, prospectors began to squat on land owned by ranchero families.
They were challenging the land grants. And the Spanish-Mexican land grants were very easy to challenge because the boundaries were so vague, undefined in many cases.
If you look at the older grants, it will say, 30 leagues this way across the creek by the oak tree with the hatchet emblazoned, is it? Whereas, look at the grid system from the Northwest Ordinance. Everything's laid out, everything's measured to a T, and so you have people who have that sort of grid outlook of how property, is claimed, and then they see these.
The Mexicanos who are living in the conquered territory, those who have become American by conquest, they believe in the American system. And they first turn to the courts. These court cases oftentimes took a very long time to decide. And in the process, the landowners, the Mexican landowners, had to pay for lawyers, they had to pay for court costs, they had to pay for translators because, of course, they don't speak the English language. They have to pay taxes. So that even in the best of circumstances, when the courts do rule in their favor, they have to sell their land anyway in order to pay for all these costs.
Mariano Vallejo doesn't know what to do. He has to deal with squatters. He complains about squatters. So what does the new California state legislature do? They pass a law protecting the squatters. So much for the Treaty of Guadalupe, Hidalgo,
Vallejo took the fight to keep his land all the way to the Supreme Court. But in 1864, to pay his court costs, Vallejo was forced to sell the last of his 65,000 acres at Rancho Petaluma to a San Francisco banker.
Mexican Americans were seen as a conquered people. Even the elites could not stand in any position of authority over the Anglo newcomers.
The language now spoken in this country, the laws that govern us, the faces we encounter, are those of the masters of the land, antagonistic to our interests and our rights. But what does that matter to the conqueror? He wishes his own well-being, not ours.
The ease with which Anglos were able to conquer Mexicans was, for many Anglo observers, proof of Anglo-superiority. An inferior people had been conquered by a superior people. Democracy had won out over feudalism and backwardness. Progress was in the hands of the Americans, and Latinos were destined to extinction.
There's a sense of the inevitability of white supremacy. It's very much like the thinking towards Native Americans, that they will eventually wither away because they can't sustain themselves with the presence of Anglo-American culture.
San Diego estaba muy pobre, porque no había quien sembrase ni hiciese nada. Yo estaba muy triste por la toma del país por los americanos. Estaba encalaverada por la cosa de los americanos.
Cheated out of her land by an American colonel, Apolinaria Lorenzana, the orphan girl who had devoted her life to the missions, could not hold on to her hard-earned wealth.
Después de haber trabajado tantos años y de haber tenido bienes, me encuentro en la mayor pobreza, viviendo del favor de Dios y de quien me da un bocado de comer.